Got here now. This isn't for people like you. The words cracked through the underground parking garage like a gunshot, each syllable soaked in disdain. Clarissa Winton's $5,000 belted wool coat flared behind her as she stormed toward a modest silver Honda Civic parked squarely in spot number 1, the most exclusive space in the entire Varelli Tower. Her heels clicked a beat of authority as she faced the driver emerging from the car. Jasmine Holloway stepped out, briefcase in hand, her eyes steady, her breath visible in the cold air. Before she could even lock her door, she was surrounded. A sea of power suits formed a semicircle around her, coffee cups in hand, designer bags slung carelessly over their shoulders, eyes full of assumption. The stares were sharp, familiar. Jasmine had seen them before. She just hadn't felt them in a long time. "Ma'am, that spot is reserved for our company's highest level leadership," Clarissa added, voice calm but sharpened by entitlement. She jabbed a manicured finger toward the small bronze plaque beneath the car. "Reserved. Executive level 1. You need to move to visitor parking immediately." Behind her, a security guard's radio crackled. A few phones quietly lifted from coat pockets. The moment was taking shape. Clarissa's performance had begun. Jasmine didn't flinch. She just stood there calm, her grip on the briefcase loose but intentional. Have you ever been so grossly underestimated that revealing the truth could ruin someone's entire career in 5 minutes? Because that's exactly what was about to happen, but no one in that garage knew it yet. And Clarissa Winton, the queen of Ashbourne's legal world, was too caught up in her own superiority to notice the quiet tremor rising beneath her. Clarissa stepped directly between Jasmine and the elevator reserved for senior leadership, her Birkin swinging like a badge of status. "Ladies and gentlemen," she called out, gesturing to the small crowd that had now gathered to watch. "This is exactly why our building's security needs to be reevaluated. Apparently, anyone can waltz into our executive garage now." Her voice carried effortlessly, trained by years of courtroom command. Jasmine didn't move. She stood still beside her Civic, framed in the sterile white light of the overhead fixtures, silent. She let the weight of the moment hang, and it did, thick and awkward, until Marcus Rennick, the tower's security chief, approached with 2 guards flanking him. His voice was firm, neutral, but Jasmine could hear the bias echoing from Clarissa's tone in his words. "Ma'am, I'm gonna need to see some identification." "Of course," Jasmine replied softly, reaching into the inner pocket of her blazer. Her motion was calm, methodical, not a single flinch, not a single excuse. But just as her hand moved, Clarissa stepped closer, too close. Jasmine could smell the perfume, something expensive, something that tried too hard. "Before you show him whatever fake ID you've got tucked in there," Clarissa whispered with faux discretion, "let me explain something. This building houses Varelli Capital Group, one of the most prestigious institutions on this side of the country. We don't have people like you in executive roles." The silence that followed wasn't stunned. It was telling. A few uncomfortable shifts in posture. No one spoke up. A young associate held up her phone a little higher, her live stream now pushing past 5,000 viewers. "People like me?" Jasmine asked, eyes steady. "You know exactly what I mean," Clarissa smirked. "This is a high-level business environment. We can't have random staff showing up early and thinking they belong in spots meant for actual decision-makers." From the crowd, Dr. Thomas Eberly, one of the firm's senior legal advisors, stepped forward. "Clarissa, perhaps we should—" "Thomas, please." She cut him off with a wave, not even turned to face him. "I got this under control." Clarissa turned back to Jasmine, tilting her head. "Sweetheart, I'm sure you're lovely, but executive parking is for people who actually run companies, not for, well, you understand." Jasmine's phone buzzed on her hip. She glanced down, calls for Bianca Fry, the COO, from the general counsel, and from the Varelli board's private line. She ignored them all. Instead, she opened a notes app and started typing. Every word Clarissa had just said, every face watching, every movement. Her Harvard law degree had taught her to document everything, but her years building Varelli Capital from the ground up had taught her something more powerful. Silence builds gravity. Timing decides whether you rise or pull everything down with you. More executives trickled into the garage, their footsteps echoing on polished concrete, their curiosity undeniable. The confrontation had magnetized a morning like a scandal in motion. Clarissa now spoke with the confidence of someone on stage, performing. Up at a partner Grant and Penmore for over 15 years, she announced, loud enough to draw more onlookers. We handle legal affairs for the majority of firms headquartered in this tower. I know who belongs here and who doesn't. She pointed to Jasmine's Honda Civic with theatrical flair. And if she were actually meant to be here, wouldn't she arrive in something appropriate? A Tesla, at the very least. A BMW. Something that screams success instead of thrift. Across the garage, the Associates TikTok stream passed 12,000 live viewers. Comments raced faster than the eye could follow. One word kept popping up over and over again. Viral. Ma'am. Chief Renna tried again, clearly wanting the situation to resolve before it exploded further. If you could just show us your parking authorization. She doesn't have it. Clarissa cut in, tone slicing the air. Look at her, Marcus. Does she look like someone with 7-figure signing authority? Or like someone who just wandered down here, hoping to sneak into the elevator? The implication hit harder than the words. Some executives visibly cringed at the bias, but none stepped forward. Behind Clarissa, a few of her colleagues from Grant and Penmore aligned themselves shoulder to shoulder. Silent support that validated every microaggression. Jasmine noticed Dr. Eberly again. This time he wasn't texting. He was watching, reading the room, perhaps himself conflicted, but he didn't interrupt. Clarissa huffed. You know what? I'm calling the police. This is trespassing, pure and simple. She whipped out her iPhone and began dialing, her fingers dancing with performative outrage. Yes, officers. I'm reporting an unauthorized individual in the executive garage at Varelli Tower. She's refusing to leave, maybe casing vehicles for theft. The words theft and unauthorized hung like smoke grenades in the cold air. A few executives instinctively stepped back. Clarissa wasn't just embarrassing Jasmine now. She was criminalizing her. She's approximately 5'7", Clarissa continued, turning slightly away from the crowd but speaking just loud enough. Black female, probably early 30s. Dressed casually, definitely not someone expected in our secure zones. Jasmine's phone buzzed again. This time, a text. This is going viral. 25K viewers now. Legal is standing by. Bianca. Jasmine looked up. Phones were everywhere now. Half the crowd filming. The LED lights above turned the garage into a perfect studio. And Clarissa, she finished her call, turned back around, and gave a smug smile. Officers will be here soon. If you leave now, I won't press charges. But if you stay, that's on you. Chief Rennick shifted uneasily. Ma'am, if you do have credentials, this would be the time to show them. She doesn't, Clarissa barked, not even letting Jasmine respond. I've worked in this building long enough to know every executive face. And trust me, this isn't one of them. At that moment, the elevator chimed. 2 officers stepped out, Officer Dana Chun and Officer Luis Montoya. Their expressions were blank, weary from the early hour and the predictability of the call. We receive a report about a possible trespasser, Officer Chun asked, scanning the sea of tailored suits, eyes landing on Jasmine, standing calmly next to her Civic. Clarissa practically lunged toward them. Yes, that's her. She's in a space meant for executive-level leadership and refusing to identify herself. I'm concerned for the safety of our staff and property. Officer Montoya took a beat, eyes flicking from Jasmine to the crowd. His face betrayed the weariness of someone who'd seen this scene play out too many times before. Ma'am, he said gently to Jasmine, may I see your driver's license and any documentation you have for parking here? Jasmine gave a small nod and calmly reached into her briefcase. But as her hand brushed against the inner flap, her fingers found the smooth edge of her executive-level keycard, the one reserved for only 3 people in the Varelli leadership hierarchy. She paused, considering. Not yet. Timing was everything. Instead, she handed Officer Montoya her driver's license. Nothing more. Here's my identification. As for the rest, she glanced toward Clarissa. There may be some confusion about who I am. Clarissa scoffed. There's no confusion. You're trespassing. You're moments away from being cuffed for it. The words weren't empty threats. She meant them. And yet, Jasmine didn't react. Not to the insult, not to the crowd, not to the police presence. Because while Clarissa Winton was performing for 40 suits and a live TikTok audience, Jasmine Holloway was waiting for one thing. The moment when the truth would land with so much weight, it would collapse the entire act Clarissa had built around herself. Officer Montoya examined Jasmine's license under the harsh white LED lighting of the garage. His eyes narrowed slightly when he reached her address, Valmont Heights. It was the kind of neighborhood only a handful of people in Ashbourne ever even visited, let alone lived in. Jasmine Holloway, he read aloud. Valmont Heights. Clarissa's smirk flickered. Valmont Heights wasn't the kind of place you fake your way into, but she recovered quickly. An address doesn't prove anything these days, she said, dismissive. Anyone can rent a room, use a borrowed address. The question is, does she have any actual right to be here? Dr. Eberly stepped toward Officer Montoya, keeping his voice low. Maybe we verify her parking credentials before this escalates. It's possible we've misread something. Thomas, don't. Clarissa cut in sharply, her tone brittle now. You're being too generous. This is a security breach. Plain and simple. More phones went up. The crowd wasn't thinning, it was growing. The TikTok stream had crossed 40,000 viewers, and now verified journalists were chiming in. Comment sections filled with disbelief and fury. Still, Jasmine stood perfectly still, not breaking eye contact with Clarissa. Officer Chun, who had been observing the subtle shifts in tone and tension, took a small step forward. Ma'am, she said carefully, do you have any documentation that might explain your presence here? Jasmine reached slowly into her briefcase, once more, this time producing a sleek leather portfolio. As she began to open it, Clarissa moved, hand outstretched. Let me see that, she barked. I can verify if it's legitimate. I know what to look for. But Jasmine didn't flinch. She tightened her grip slightly, her tone still calm, but now coated with steel. Please don't touch my personal property. The garage stilled. Her words had a gravity to them, like a judge issuing a warning before handing down a sentence. I'm just trying to help resolve this, Clarissa insisted, her fingers still hovering near the folder. As senior legal counsel to half the companies in this building, I have the authority to... You have no authority over me, Jasmine said, voice quiet, measured, but landing like thunder in a church. None whatsoever. Clarissa blinked. Excuse me. Jasmine didn't move. I said, you have no authority over me. For the first time, their eyes locked, really locked, and something in Jasmine's gaze stripped away Clarissa's confidence like wind through brittle leaves. Clarissa took a step back. Her voice cracked. I've practiced law here for 15 years. I know the rules. I know the procedures. I know who belongs here. Is that what you were about to say? Jasmine asked, tone perfectly even. Clarissa didn't answer. Her mouth opened, then shut. Around them, 30 executives stood in eerie silence. The phones didn't waver. The feed was approaching 50,000 viewers. The quiet was not just awkward. It was suffocating. Finally, Dr. Eberly stepped in. Clarissa, he said gently, maybe we should let the officers handle this. They're trained for this kind of situation. Then he turned to Jasmine with care. And ma'am, if you do have documentation proving your presence here, now would be an excellent time. Jasmine nodded once and opened her portfolio fully. Inside were several crisp documents. But before she could pull any of them out, Clarissa lunged. "That's forged," she shouted, pointing. "Nobody in an executive role shows up in a Civic. Look at her clothes. Look at her car. Look at what?" The voice didn't come from Jasmine. It came from behind the crowd. A new presence stepped into the light. Heads turned. There, walking toward the group in the executive elevator, was Bianca Fry, Chief Operating Officer of Varelli Capital Group. Everything about her said power. Her stride, her calm, her silence. "Bianca." Clarissa breathed, relief flooding her face. "Finally. Thank God. We got a situation. This woman's trespassing. She tried to impersonate someone." "Clarissa." Bianca interrupted sharply. "Stop talking." The words didn't rise. They sliced. Clarissa froze mid-sentence, blinking in confusion. "What?" she whispered. "You heard me." Bianca walked directly to Jasmine. Their eyes met for just 3 seconds. 3 seconds that felt like history collapsing into place. "Ma'am," Bianca said clearly, "my deepest apologies for this delay. The board is waiting for you upstairs." The words detonated like a bomb. Clarissa's face drained of color. "Board?" Dr. Eberly echoed. "What board?" "The emergency board meeting scheduled for 7 a.m. Bianca replied, not looking away from Jasmine. "To finalize this morning's acquisition." Officer Chun straightened instinctively. "Ms. Fry, to confirm, this woman has authorization to be here." Bianca reached into her blazer, pulling out an executive key card identical to the one Jasmine had in her pocket. She held it up so every camera could see. "She has the highest level of access in this building," Bianca stated, her voice cutting through every remaining doubt. "Higher than mine, higher than anyone else in this garage." Clarissa took a half step backward, her breath hitching audibly. She reached for the concrete pillar behind her, suddenly needing support. That's not possible," she mumbled. "Is it?" Bianca said coldly. "Clarissa, in all your years practicing law in this tower, did you ever bother to research who owns it?" Clarissa's hand slipped slightly against the concrete pillar. Her grip tightened, and for the first time that morning, she looked afraid. "Varelli Capital owns this building," she stammered. "Everyone knows that." Bianca gave a slow nod. "Correct. So the question is, who do you think runs Varelli Capital?" The silence that followed was so sharp it might have cut steel. Phone stopped moving. Executive faces froze. The officers exchanged glances. Clarissa's mouth opened, then closed again. No words came. 30 professionals in $1,200 suits, standing in a garage beneath Ashbourne's most powerful financial tower, suddenly found themselves as clueless as interns on their first day. Jasmine finally moved. Calmly, she reached in her briefcase. Not for documents, not for her phone, but for a small, black leather credential case. She opened it with quiet precision, revealing an executive badge adorned with holographic security seals. The light from the ceiling panels caught the edge of the badge, refracting in dazzling flashes of blue and silver. Officer Montoya stepped forward. His skeptical expression shifted the moment his eyes registered the title. "Jasmine Holloway," he read aloud, voice echoing. "Chairwoman and Chief Executive Officer, Varelli Capital Group." The words weren't shouted, but they reverberated like thunder. An audible gasp swept through the crowd. Several executives took a step back. Others looked around as if reality had suddenly snapped in half. The 3 Grant and Penmore attorneys standing behind Clarissa began edging away. Like rats fleeing a sinking ship, Clarissa didn't move. Her expression was frozen, somewhere between disbelief and dread. That's not possible," she whispered. "I've never seen." Jasmine's voice was low but carried. "You've never seen me?" Her eyes didn't blink. "That's because I don't make a habit of announcing my presence in buildings I own. I prefer to observe how people behave when they think no one important is watching." The silence fractured. The TikTok stream had crossed 75,000 viewers. Clips were already flooding social media. News outlets scrambled to verify the moment. Hashtags like hashtag Varelli CEO and hashtag Ashbourne Garage began trending nationally. Bianca stepped forward beside Jasmine, voice clear, formal. Allow me to properly introduce Jasmine Holloway, founder of Varelli Capital Group. 12 years ago, she launched it with a $50,000 loan and a vision to disrupt old money finance culture. Today, she oversees $4.8 billion in assets and over 23,000 employees globally. Clarissa's composure collapsed in real time. The woman she tried to have arrested, humiliated, and physically removed had just been revealed as the very person whose name was on every lease, whose company held the power to terminate every contract in the building, including hers. Her knees buckled slightly, and Dr. Eberly instinctively reached out to steady her. Jasmine wasn't finished. She pulled out a slim tablet and tapped a command. The garage's emergency alert screen flickered, normally used for fire drill notices and weather warnings, and lit up with a document. Acquisition agreement, Grant and Penmore LLP. As of 12:01 this morning, Jasmine said evenly, Varelli Capital Group finalized its purchase of Grant and Penmore for $340 million. A new wave of gasps filled the air. It's a premium price for a firm that's been hemorrhaging clients due to cultural issues. Clarissa's face went sheet white. Bianca stepped in with brutal efficiency. The acquisition was kept confidential until this morning to prevent disruption. The partners voted unanimously to accept the offer, motivated by our promise to address systemic problems within the firm's leadership culture. Officer Chun, who had been standing still through it all, finally spoke. So, ma'am, no trespassing concerns. Jasmine turned to face her. No charges, she said softly, but there will be consequences. She tapped the tablet again. A new page flashed. Page 47, Employee Handbook. Zero tolerance for discrimination. Jasmine's voice was calm, but absolute. As of 12:01 a.m., every Grant and Penmore employee is now subject to Varelli Capital's policies. Those include immediate termination for racially discriminatory conduct, no warnings, no negotiations, no second chances. Clarissa tried to speak, but no words came. Her breath stuttered, hands trembling. You can't. I have a contract. I worked here for 15 years. You had a contract, Jasmine corrected. It included a morality clause, voided in cases of conduct that damages the company's reputation. We have video evidence, dozens of angles. You physically grabbed my property, filed a false police report, and repeatedly made discriminatory remarks in front of 30 witnesses. The feed was still live. Lawyers in the comments section confirmed every word. Clarissa swayed, leaning fully against the pillar now, makeup cracking, hands limp at her sides. Her kingdom had fallen, and the woman she tried to erase from that garage floor had just shown the world who really owned the building, the firm, and the future. The crowd stood frozen, the weight of Jasmine's words hanging over the garage like smoke after an explosion. Phones were still recording, but no one was speaking, no one was moving. Clarissa leaned heavily against the pillar, her earlier bravado gone, replaced by visible panic. I didn't mean, she began, but Jasmine didn't need to hear her excuses. She tapped her tablet again, and the display shifted to a familiar document. Employee Handbook, Section 12.3, Termination for Discrimination. Her voice remained calm, unwavering. We consulted civil rights attorneys, employment experts, and HR leaders. Our policy is crystal clear. Anyone found engaging in racially discriminatory behavior faces immediate termination, with cause. She let that sit. Clarissa, your actions this morning weren't a mistake. They were a pattern, a deeply ingrained one. Clarissa's voice cracked. You can't. I spent my whole life climbing a ladder built on exclusion. Jasmine interjected gently, not angry, just direct. You weren't just rude. You filed a false police report. You attempted to weaponize law enforcement to remove someone you thought didn't belong, all while broadcasting it live to an audience of 75,000. She gestured around. You built a career making people like me feel small. Today you just happened to aim it at the wrong woman. Clarissa buried her face in her hands, shoulders shaking, but Jasmine didn't look away. And yet, I'm not here to destroy you. I'm here to break the system that created you. Bianca stepped closer, tablet in hand. Effective immediately, she said. Clarissa Winton is suspended from all leadership duties, pending final HR action. We've reviewed her contract. The morality clause is enforceable. Termination is legally sound. But Jasmine raised a hand. Not yet. Her voice surprised even Bianca. Clarissa looked up, dazed. What do you mean? Jasmine's tone softened, but not with pity, with purpose. I'm offering you a choice. She brought up a new file on her tablet and projected it to the garage screen. This is Varelli's Executive Transformation Program. 6 months. Intensive anti-bias education, civil rights coursework, supervised mentorship with underrepresented staff, and personal accountability coaching. Clarissa blinked as if trying to process a language she didn't understand. You're not firing me. Not yet. Jasmine repeated. You can walk away now. Terminated with cause, no references, and a record that will haunt you for years. Or, she stepped forward. You can become our first pilot participant in a program designed to unlearn everything the system rewarded you for. You'll start over, from the bottom, earn your way back, this time the right way. Clarissa's lip trembled. What? Jasmine took a breath. Because if people like you can be changed, it sends a louder message than a termination ever could. Dr. Eberly stepped forward. This is unheard of. You're offering rehabilitation for discriminatory leadership. Not rehabilitation, Bianca clarified. Transformation. With results, not sympathy. Clarissa slowly reached for the envelope Bianca extended. A thick manila folder, stamped with the program logo. Her hand shook as she took it. And if I fail, she whispered. Then you're done, Jasmine replied. Simple and clean. No severance. No second chance. No access to this industry again. Clarissa's fingers gripped the envelope like a life raft. You have until 5 p.m. today, Bianca added. Sign and submit, or walk away forever. Around the garage, the shift was palpable. Executives who had said nothing while Clarissa led the confrontation now washed in silence, as the woman who once owned every room was being offered something she'd never imagined. The chance to rebuild. Not her title, but her character. The boardroom on the 45th floor of Varelli Tower stretched high above the skyline of Ashbourne, but no one was admiring the view. The morning light poured in through floor-to-ceiling windows, but the air inside was thick with the memory of what had unfolded an hour earlier in the garage. Clarissa Winton sat at the far end of the long mahogany conference table. Her posture collapsed inward, the manila envelope unopened before her. Her earlier smirk was gone, replaced by vacant eyes and a fistful of tissues. She wasn't a partner anymore. She wasn't even sure who she was. Jasmine Holloway stood at the head of the table, laptop open, the Varelli Capital logo glowing softly behind her on the screen. Thank you all for coming, she began. Understand this morning has been enlightening. Light chuckles rippled through the room. Dr. Thomas Eberly sat near Jasmine, his face still marked by the gravity of the moment. Bianca Fry sat at Jasmine's right, as always. Measured, loyal, steady. Free attorneys from Grant and Penmore huddled near the windows, clearly unsure of whether they still had jobs. They had stood silently behind Clarissa. Now they stood exposed. Jasmine advanced her slide deck. Before we address the formal acquisition terms, she said, let's talk about what happened in our garage and what it reveals about our industry. The next slide filled the screen with numbers. $64 billion in annual business losses due to workplace discrimination. Click, Companies with diverse leadership perform 35% better. Click. Yet only 3% of Fortune 500 CEOs are black women. The facts were brutal, but the room was silent, because no one could argue with them now. Jasmine continued, voice calm but direct. This acquisition wasn't about expanding legal capacity. It was about culture, systemic behavior, reputation, and power. Not the kind you boast about, but the kind you wield when no one's watching. The screen now displayed a diagram, a spiderweb of firms and contracts linked through Grant and Penmore. 17 companies in this room are tied to that web. 29 have direct contractual or reputational exposure. Bianca spoke up. In 5 years, these companies have paid $127 million in discrimination-related settlements, another $200 million in lost revenue due to damaged partnerships and lawsuits. The weight of the number silenced even the most senior executives. So, Jasmine asked, turning from the screen to the room, what happens next? Dr. Eberly was first to speak. Whatever you're proposing, we're listening. Jasmine clicked forward again. The Meridian Equity Protocol, she said. A transformation model. One we're implementing across the entire network. Starting now. The slides revealed the plan. Third-party audits, real-time data, tracking on promotions and hiring. Leadership training, not in name, but in substance, with consequences for failure. This is no longer optional, Jasmine added. Any company under our umbrella that refuses will lose its partnership. Executives shifted nervously. Bianca leaned in. And that includes transactional partnerships. Borelli processes $2.3 billion a quarter. Refusal means replacement. Dr. Sarah Ling, CEO of a regional asset firm, cleared her throat. And if we accept, you retain access to Borelli's full platform, reduced processing rates, and, more importantly, a brand aligned with the future. Clarissa suddenly spoke. Her voice was hoarse, almost inaudible. You planned this. For months. Jasmine didn't flinch. 2 years. Ever since we lost 3 brilliant black women from the legal pipeline. 3 stars who left because they were tired of being dismissed, overlooked, and degraded. She clicked through photos. Maria Santos, Angela Kim, Kesha Williams. They didn't quit the profession. The profession quit them. The final image showed the 3 smiling, arm in arm, at a law school graduation ceremony. This isn't about revenge, Jasmine continued. It's about responsibility. It's about the system that trained Clarissa to be who she was, and how we rewrite it before it creates another her. One of the attorneys near the window finally spoke. What about us? The ones who stood behind her. Are we done too? Jasmine studied him for a moment. You're not terminated, but you're not exempt. You'll enroll in the same program Clarissa has been offered. Transformation is a reserve for the worst offenders. It's mandatory for all who enabled them. She pulled up a new slide. Phase 1. Executive Transformation Launch. Next Monday. 6 months of certified learning, mentorship, performance audits. Bianca explained the logistics. Jasmine concluded. This program is now the standard. No transformation, no leadership. The room processed in silence. Then Dr. Ling nodded. We'll join. 1 by 1, companies signed on. 20 out of 23 executives present agreed to adopt the protocol. It wasn't just about optics anymore. It was about survival. Clarissa finally opened her envelope, her hands trembling. What about me? She asked, voice fragile. Jasmine met her gaze. The room stilled. Clarissa, she said, walking toward her. What do you think should happen to you? Clarissa blinked, stunned. I should be fired. I should be blacklisted. She swallowed hard. I became someone I never want my daughter to admire. The room shifted again, not toward forgiveness, but toward reflection. Jasmine took a seat beside her, not above her, but beside her. We hired a social psychologist, Dr. Monica Jameson, Jasmine said. She studied workplace discrimination. Her conclusion? People aren't born discriminatory. They're rewarded into it. Clarissa whispered, "That was me." Jasmine nodded. "But if you're willing, you can help dismantle the very ladder you once climbed. Our program doesn't just reform, it redeploys." She handed Clarissa a new file. Director of Inclusive Culture, contingent upon successful program completion. Around the room, eyebrows rose. Clarissa looked stunned. "You'd hire me? After everything I did?" "I'm not hiring who you were. I'm investing in who you could become." Jasmine stood. The best advocates for change are often the ones who once stood in its way. If you complete the program, you'll help lead it. Dr. Everly exhaled deeply. It's genius. A systemic problem met with a systemic solution. Bianca added, 90% retention in pilot testing, 0 recidivism, measurable increases in team satisfaction and performance. Jasmine, close her laptop. Effective immediately. Completion of this transformation program will be required for all senior leaders in our network. Not punishment, certification. Clarissa clutched the folder like a second chance incarnate. "Yes," she said. Then louder, "Yes, I want to change." The applause was not loud. It was sincere. A ripple of something new passed through the room. Not fear, not guilt, but hope. Jasmine turned back to the screen. And this isn't where it ends. It's where it begins. The next slide read, "Available to all Varelli partner companies starting next quarter." What began in a garage was now changing an industry. 6 months later, Jasmine took her seat at the Varelli Equity Summit. The room was filled with over 300 executives. 800 more were on a wait list to join the network. And the keynote speaker, "Ladies and gentlemen," Bianca announced, "please welcome our Director of Inclusive Culture, Clarissa Winton." Clarissa walked on stage, not as the woman who once barked at a black CEO to wait outside, but as someone reborn. 6 months ago, I was the worst version of myself, she began. But Jasmine Holloway saw something I didn't. That people can change when systems change. That shame isn't accountability, and that transformation is harder than punishment, but also more powerful. She clicked through her own slides, metrics, successes, partnerships. Today we're expanding globally. 18 countries, $75 billion in shared revenue, 200,000 employees impacted. Jasmine, seated in the front row, smiled. Not because she'd won, but because the system had begun to heal. "This isn't the end of our story," Clarissa said. "It's just the beginning, because every time we change how we lead, we rewrite what leadership looks like." The standing ovation lasted 4 full minutes. But the real change happened far from applause, in daily conversations, in hiring rooms, in policy meetings where Jasmine's quiet revolution now had a voice in every seat.